Even a blind man could see that this is gonna be good.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Glasses Push. My name is Chuck, and today we are talking about two books. We're talking about Stephen King and Peter Straub's Jack Sawyer series. So that's The Talisman, and then its follow-up, Black House. Who should read these? Obviously, this is homework for any of Stephen King's constant readers. But especially if you are a fan of the Dark Tower series. I'm just starting the Dark Tower series, but there are so many parallels. And why should you care? Of course, I mentioned in a previous video, the Dark Tower series is going to be chronicled through a film and television project. So this ties in heavily to that. But even for people that don't care about the Dark Tower, and maybe aren't regular Stephen King readers, there is a big reason to care. This is a lot more fantastical than a lot of Stephen King's books, and The Talisman especially is heavily influenced by Tom Sawyer. I mean, his name's Jack Sawyer. Come on, pretty obvious. So The Talisman especially is more of a fantasy adventure. It's different territory for Stephen King, and that's largely due to the fact that this is one of the few times that Stephen King has a writing partner. So, what did I think? Well, let me just say there's a huge reason why I'm lumping two books together in one review. The Talisman introduces you to a very unique world. It sets a lot of ideas in motion, and there are a couple unforgettable characters. Overall, though, I was a little underwhelmed by The Talisman, but I had been reassured that Black House was far superior, and I found that to be the case for myself. So the joint review is because if you have read The Talisman, were left feeling a little tepid about it, and did not proceed to Black House, this is for me to tell you you should absolutely read Black House. And if you haven't read either, there's enough to get you through The Talisman. Clearly, Black House being a sequel has many references to The Talisman. Getting through a lesser work to have the massive payoff in its sequel, I found very rewarding. A very interesting thing to note about these two books is that they are separated by decades, that Peter Straub and Stephen King chose to revisit a story so many years after the original. But not only that, they allowed the characters to age the exact same amount of time that was passed between release dates. When you add up so many years of writing experience, the improvement in quality and style is astounding. Now let's walk through each of them. So, The Talisman, like I said, is a fantasy adventure. There's a quote from Tom Sawyer at the beginning and end of The Talisman. Right away, you're reminded of the influence. So this is a story about small beginnings and travels that lead to a lot of encounters with interesting characters and some pretty tense situations. While I'm not familiar with Peter Straub's works, as I have been working through Stephen King's collection, I've noticed that most Stephen King novels have an incredibly strong start. The setup is amazing, and I have found the payoffs at the end of the handful of Stephen King books I've read to be very rewarding, but others believe that Stephen King ends up painting himself into a corner and having to resolve his stories in perhaps unsatisfactory ways or lazy ways. This book is actually the opposite. The beginning is very slow before the fantasy elements creep in. It almost takes too long for the first fantastical hook to appear and kind of, sticking you like a fish. And so you're caught, you're hooked. As reality and fantasy blend, it's a very intriguing concept. In the book, for a long while, it's a lot of traveling, and there are several detours that are excruciatingly difficult to get through. Namely, for anyone who's read the book, and also as a warning to anybody who will read it, there is a scene, or a substantial portion of the book has the main character working in a bar. There's no real point for him to stay in one place so long, and especially when it doesn't seem to be serving the plot, and none of the characters encountered during that portion of the book are particularly interesting. Stephen King, also very famous for rich character development, very complex characters, and characters that grow and evolve. In this book, that's not really the case. Almost every single character is very one-note, and most are very forgettable. There is a character named Wolf, who is so unique and is one of the most memorable characters that I have encountered in a book in a long time. He's absolutely fascinating, but then you also have Jack's best friend, who is one of the most obnoxious, whiny characters I've ever seen in a book. And the obnoxious, whiny nature of this character, while it does add some conflict to the book, you could have easily met, like, the plot points that were trying to be achieved in a less grating fashion. That's all my way of saying that the character development and just the fleshing out of these characters leaves a lot to be desired. The villains are borderline cartoonish, so definitely, I mean, I get it, it's fantasy, but that's a little over the top. However, as the book gets into the final act, leading up to the climax, what was a much more plotting affair suddenly becomes a page-turner. You get some really unnerving scenes, some really suspenseful scenes, and at that point, the last third of the book, you just want to barrel through. It's really exciting. The final pages feel like a letdown, but by that point, you're running on pure adrenaline. You can forgive the semi-forgettable last chapter because of everything that immediately preceded it. While the detailed sketches of characters are lacking, Stephen King's knack for description is in full force here. So really, with this book that is part fantasy, part adventure, the adventure part feels as grueling to read as it was for the character to go through. And while you want to feel like an adventure book is taking you on a journey, you don't want to have to suffer through it. The fantasy elements are incredible, though. And as little information as you can go into this with, I say go for it. That's why I don't like spoilers or huge details. I just want to tell you what I think, get you hooked enough to see for yourself. There's spoilers on the internet if you want them. I recommend not going for them. Don't even read the back of the book. Just be brave. So, that's The Talisman. Black House starts 20 years later, and the book opens with one of the most fascinating chapters I've ever read. How it sets up the book tonally, it's cinematic, it's unique, it's a wonder to experience. The style, you just start with the writing style comparisons between The Talisman and Black House. The Talisman is a lot more straightforward, traditional prose. Black House takes Stephen King's unique Meritage blend of poetic language and conversational tone and mixes them to perfection. We are introduced to the town from a bird's eye view and are given essentially a single shot camera perspective that travels through windows, through doors, glimpsing each character, and then we get a description of us pulling away, moving through the town. You get a great sense of location, and while you don't realize at the time, you see every single main character and location in this first chapter that plays out like the most ambitious single shot scene of any movie. It's ballsy, it's daring, it's crass, it's poetic, and it's so different from The Talisman. It's so modern and so avant-garde. Think you're gonna be like me and realizing right away how special this is. And as you go through, you see every single character in this story is not what they seem. There are no archetypical characters in here. They all break the mold, and any assumption you make about them will be confronted, will be challenged, and will be changed. Whereas The Talisman, you really only had two characters to love. In Black House, there are so many to love, but standing out amongst all of them, a character with so much personality. He doesn't have just one, he has like four. And once you meet him and understand him for what he is, he takes the uniqueness of Wolf, a beacon of interest and hope for readers to continue going through The Talisman, and he just blows Wolf out of the water. If Wolf is one of the most fascinating characters you've encountered in a book in a long while, this new character, Henry, is even better. And this book follows in the Stephen King tradition of incredible world building. And this is more of a fantasy suspense horror, where as opposed to this adventure where you're traveling long distances, it's more claustrophobic being set in one town that's plagued by a serial killer. And the details are gruesome. There's a lot of moments where you're going to be cringing in all of the best and worst ways. Like I had mentioned how The Talisman didn't succumb to what some people feel is Stephen King's Achilles heel, you know, finishing a book in a satisfying way. This is where Black House really stumbles. All the buildup is so fantastic, so believable, and by the time you get to the last third, there are some events that happen that do not make sense in the context of all the story that preceded it, and some things that I don't even think the characters would have accepted, and yet they go unmentioned. The final pages of Black House make up for the kind of sloppy, disappointing climax, but it's truly a book based on style and character. And it handles those two facets with aplomb. And it's very easy to forgive a book that stumbles at the end when it was truly a marvel and a joy to go through like 90-95% of it. And as the connections to the events of the Talisman become clear, it completely justified reading the Talisman. So, the Talisman was an average book, but experiencing that to fully appreciate what is such a unique and riveting book, it's worth it. So, what would I rate these books? So for the Talisman, cool ideas alone and one fantastic character do not a great novel make. When you even out the pros and cons of it, you're at the bottom end of average. It's a 71. And Black House, we're tipping the scales the other way. The writing in Black House, it is a masterclass in how to write a page-turner. How to write characters, how to develop style. So the ending wasn't that great, but I'm not going to knock a book that much for being a little sloppy at the end when it does so many things right and so much better than so many other books. Let it have a couple shortcomings. They're trifles compared to the greatness. Black House gets a 93. So, when and where should you read these? The next time you've got a substantial opening slot, just power through the Talisman fast. Rush through it, even if you're struggling to get to Black House. It's going to be so rewarding. I guarantee it. And if there's ever a technology developed to give you your time back, if you feel you wasted your time on the Talisman before getting to Black House, I'll give you some time back. This is a 100% time back guarantee with an asterisk saying some small print. There's some legal jargon in there. If the technology exists in my lifetime, I will give you your time back. Otherwise, you're kind of SOL. But I believe it's worth it. So once you have that space, read these, and do not read these in the dark. I was actually listening to the audiobook for these, and I creeped myself out a lot because I was walking around a deserted wash that has wolves in it at 4 o'clock in the morning, and that is terrifying. So read it anywhere where it's light and there aren't wolves and you're not outside in the cold before the sun even dares rear its head over the mountains. Do you trust me that Black House is so good that it's worth going through an average book to get to something that is so fascinatingly written? Have you read both of these? What did you think? What's the most terrifying place that you've ever read or listened to a book? I'll give the person who gives me the best answer a 150% time back guarantee. Assuming there's a machine that allows me to do so, with the asterisk and all. Oh yeah, and thanks for watching.